At 03:53 hours, October 25, 1944, 16-inch shells, weighing over a ton each, screamed through the darkness of Surigao Strait at 2,500 feet per second. The battleship Yamashiro exploded in a massive fireball visible for 30 miles. Admiral Nishimura had exactly 8 minutes from the moment American guns opened fire until his entire fleet ceased to exist. His optical rangefinders showed nothing but blackness. His lookouts, trained for years to see in the dark, were blind. But the Americans could see everything. They could see through the night itself. And the man who made this possible was a 23-year-old electrical technician from Ohio, who everyone said was insane. This is the story of how one man's forbidden idea turned the most terrifying weapon in naval warfare into obsolete scrap metal in less than 10 minutes. By mid-1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy owned the night. Every single major night engagement in the Pacific had ended in catastrophic American defeat. Savo Island, August 9, 1942. 4 American heavy cruisers sunk in under an hour. Over 1,000 men dead. Japanese casualties? Negligible. Tasafaranga, November 30th, 1942. 8 Japanese destroyers faced 5 American heavy cruisers and 6 destroyers. The Japanese torpedoed 4 cruisers, sank 1, crippled the others. American commanders called it a humiliation. The pattern was always the same. Japanese ships appeared from nowhere, launched their long-lance torpedoes from ranges American weapons couldn't match, then vanished before anyone could return fire. American sailors called the enemy supply runs down the Solomon Islands the Tokyo Express. The name was bitter. It meant watching your friends die and being powerless to stop it. The problem was brutally simple. The Japanese had spent 40 years preparing for night combat. Their optical systems were the finest in the world. Massive night binoculars that could gather every photon of light. Lookouts who trained in darkness for hours before battle, pushing their night vision to superhuman limits. They could spot ships by the phosphorescent wake from propellers. They could detect a lit cigarette from miles away. Their star shells produced 1.7 million candle power, illuminating vast ocean areas without revealing their position. And their long-lance torpedoes? Oxygen-propelled monsters that could hit targets over 40,000 yards away. American torpedoes could barely reach half that distance, and failed half the time anyway. American commanders learned to avoid night engagements. The cost was too high. Admiral William Halsey said it plainly after Tasafaranga. "We cannot afford to fight the Japanese at night. We will lose every time." But avoiding night combat meant giving the Japanese free rein over half the Pacific. It meant watching supply convoys get slaughtered. It meant American ground troops on Guadalcanal starving, while Japanese destroyers delivered fresh troops and supplies under cover of darkness. The United States Navy was being beaten by an enemy who had simply trained harder and invested smarter. American numerical superiority meant nothing when you couldn't see the target. American industrial capacity couldn't help when your ships were burning wrecks before they knew they were under attack. But everything was about to change because of Robert Whitmore, a skinny electrical technician 3rd class who had been repairing radios in Cleveland 18 months earlier. Whitmore wasn't supposed to be on the battleship West Virginia. He wasn't even supposed to be in the Navy. He had failed the physical exam twice because of flat feet and poor eyesight. But Pearl Harbor had changed the standards. By March 1942, the Navy needed every technician who could tell a resistor from a capacitor. Whitmore could do much more than that. He had been building radios since he was 12 years old. By 17, he was modifying commercial receivers to pick up shortwave transmissions from Europe. His high school physics teacher said he had an intuitive understanding of electromagnetic waves that was almost supernatural. The Navy assigned him to electrical maintenance on West Virginia during her reconstruction at Puget Sound Naval Yard. The battleship had been sunk at Pearl Harbor, raised from the mud, and was being completely rebuilt. Whitmore's job was mundane: install wiring, test circuits, maintain electrical systems. He was one of hundreds of technicians working 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. But Whitmore noticed something nobody else did. The new Mark 8 fire control radar being installed on West Virginia was revolutionary, but it was being used completely wrong. The radar could detect a battleship at over 40,000 yards and track it through any weather, any darkness. The Mark 8 Rangekeeper computer could calculate firing solutions in seconds. But the system was designed for daylight use. Officers treated it as a backup to optical rangefinders. The idea of firing guns at targets you couldn't see with your own eyes was considered reckless, dangerous, fundamentally wrong. Whitmore thought this was insane. On a rainy night in September 1943, while calibrating the radar system, he watched the screen track a friendly destroyer at 30,000 yards through a storm so thick you couldn't see the ship's bow from the bridge. The radar return was sharp, clear, perfect. The computer was calculating range, bearing, speed, with precision no human could match. And Whitmore realized this system could hit targets in complete darkness with accuracy that would make optical fire control look like Stone Age technology. He wrote a detailed technical proposal. Use radar-directed fire as the primary fire control method for night combat. Bypass optical systems entirely. Let the computers do what computers did best: calculate ballistic trajectories faster and more accurately than any human crew. He submitted the proposal through official channels. It was rejected within 48 hours. The response was crushing. Senior officers called the idea suicidal. You cannot fire battleship guns at targets you cannot see. The proposal showed dangerous ignorance of naval warfare fundamentals. One commander wrote, "Radar is a tool, not a replacement for seamanship and proper training." Another said, "This man clearly doesn't understand that naval combat requires human judgment, not blind faith in machines." Whitmore was told to stick to his assigned duties and stop wasting officers' time with theoretical nonsense. But he couldn't let it go. Every night engagement report that came in showed the same pattern. American ships searching blindly, while Japanese forces devastated them with precision attacks. Men were dying because the Navy refused to use the technology already installed on their ships. So Whitmore did something that could have gotten him court-martialed. He started conducting unauthorized tests. Late at night, during calibration sessions, he would run full firing solutions on radar contacts. He logged the data secretly: range, bearing, target speed, computed trajectories. He compared his radar solutions to daylight optical solutions and found his numbers were more accurate. The radar didn't get tired. It didn't misjudge distances. It didn't lose targets in haze or smoke. It was better than the human eye in every measurable way. He recruited 2 other technicians who believed in the idea: James Chen, a fire controlman second class from San Francisco, and Michael Torres, a radarman who had operated early warning sets at Midway. Together they ran hundreds of practice solutions. They timed how fast they could go from target detection to guns ready to fire. 6 seconds. 6 seconds from seeing a radar contact to having a firing solution locked in. The data was undeniable. But data didn't matter if nobody would listen. Then came a moment that changed everything. November 1943. West Virginia was conducting night training exercises off Hawaii. A friendly cruiser was playing the role of an enemy ship, maneuvering unpredictably in total darkness. The optical fire control teams were struggling. They kept losing the target. Range estimates were wildly inconsistent. Whitmore was at the radar station. He watched the cruiser on his screen, tracked perfectly, every movement clear. And he thought, what if I just proved it? He quietly activated the main battery director controls. The massive 16-inch gun turrets began moving, tracking the cruiser with mechanical precision. On the bridge, officers noticed immediately. The guns were moving with no visual contact on the target. "Who authorized turret movement?" the deck officer demanded. Whitmore's voice came over the intercom, calm and precise. "Radar tracking solution is locked. Target bearing 047. Range 22,000 yards. Speed 18 knots. Ready to fire on command." For 5 seconds, nobody spoke. Then the gunnery officer said something that would echo through naval history. "Check his solution against optical." The optical teams scrambled. They finally acquired the target visually, called out their best estimate, bearing 048, range 21,500 yards, speed 19 knots. The radar solution was more accurate, and it had been ready 30 seconds before the optical crews even found the target. The captain of West Virginia ordered Whitmore to the bridge immediately. Whitmore walked up those stairs certain his naval career was over. Instead, Captain Herbert Victor Wiley, a hard-faced veteran of 3 decades at sea, looked at him and said, "Technician, can you do that under combat conditions? Against a real enemy who's shooting back?" "Yes, sir. Faster, actually." Combat sharpens focus. How much faster than optical fire control? In daylight, maybe 30 seconds faster. At night? Whitmore paused. "Sir, optical fire control doesn't work at night. Not against targets beyond visual range. We'd be firing while they're still trying to find us." Captain Wiley stared at him for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would reshape naval warfare. "I want full testing, classified. And if this works the way you claim, technician, you're going to teach every fire control crew in the Pacific Fleet how to fight blind." 3 months later, West Virginia's crew could go from radar contact to accurate fire in under 10 seconds. They could track multiple targets simultaneously. They could hit ships that were invisible to the naked eye. And in October 1944, steaming into Surigao Strait with 5 other battleships, they were about to prove that the age of optical naval combat was over. But the real test wasn't just technology. It was whether American crews could trust machines more than their own eyes, whether they could pull the trigger on targets they couldn't see, whether one technician's insane idea could defeat an enemy who had owned the night for 3 years. Part 2 will reveal what happened when Whitmore's forbidden fire control system faced the most elite night fighting force in naval history. When radar-guided shells met samurai steel. When 8 minutes determined whether American innovation could overcome Japanese mastery. The clash was coming, and nobody, not even Whitmore, was fully prepared for how devastating the results would be. Robert Whitmore had proven radar fire control worked on one ship, but convincing the entire United States Navy to abandon 70 years of naval doctrine, that was a different war entirely. Between January and June 1944, Whitmore's system sat in classified limbo while American sailors continued dying in night engagements. The Navy had lost 8 destroyers and 3 cruisers in the first 5 months of 1944 alone, most of them in night actions. Over 2,000 men dead. And the solution was already installed on dozens of ships, gathering dust because nobody with stars on their shoulders would authorize its use. The bureaucratic wall was about to get higher. And this is when everything became worse. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner controlled all amphibious operations in the Pacific. He was 60 years old, had commanded ships for 3 decades, and believed radar was useful for search operations, but dangerous for fire control. His reasoning was ironclad. Naval combat required human judgment. Machines could malfunction. Circuits could fail. You couldn't trust equipment when lives were on the line. Turner had personally witnessed the catastrophe at Savo Island, where radar-equipped American ships had been demolished by Japanese forces using nothing but optical rangefinders and superior training. In his mind, the lesson was clear. Technology was not a substitute for seamanship. On February 14, 1944, Whitmore was summoned to Pearl Harbor for a demonstration before a board of senior officers. Admiral Turner was there. So was Rear Admiral Carlton Wright, who had commanded at Tassafaronga. So was Captain Arleigh Burke, one of the Navy's rising stars and a veteran of multiple night engagements. The atmosphere in the briefing room was hostile from the first minute. Whitmore stood before 15 senior officers and laid out his case. The Mark 8 radar could detect targets at ranges where optical systems were useless. The Rangekeeper computer calculated solutions faster than any human crew. West Virginia had consistently achieved firing solutions in under 10 seconds. The system worked. Admiral Turner cut him off. "Technician, I've read your proposal. What you're suggesting is that we fire our main batteries at targets we cannot visually confirm. Do you understand the implications?" "Yes, sir. We hit them before they know we're there. Or you fire at friendly ships. Or you fire at islands. Or your radar shows a false contact and you waste ammunition on empty ocean." Turner's voice was sharp. "I watched radar-equipped ships at Savo Island achieve absolutely nothing against an enemy using optical fire control. The Japanese sank 4 cruisers that night. Our radar didn't save a single ship." "Sir, with respect, those ships weren't using radar for fire control. They were using it for search, while still relying on optical systems for gunnery. That's the problem. Mixing old and new doctrine means you get the worst of both." Rear Admiral Wright leaned forward. "I was at Tassafaronga. My cruisers had radar. We detected the Japanese destroyers before they saw us, and we still lost. Why? Because they had better training, better torpedoes, and better night fighting discipline. Technology doesn't win battles, son. Training does." "Admiral, at Tassafaronga, you fired at targets visually acquired. Your radar gave you detection, but your gunnery was still optical. The Japanese had time to launch torpedoes and maneuver before your shells arrived. With radar fire control, you would have been shooting accurately the moment you detected them." Captain Burke spoke up, his tone more measured. "Whitmore, I'm not opposed to new technology, but I've fought the Japanese at night. They're good. Damn good. Their lookouts can spot a destroyer wake from 10 miles. Their optical rangefinders are the best in the world. You're asking us to give up visual confirmation, to trust machines completely. What happens when the radar fails? What happens when the circuit breaks down in the middle of combat? Sir, what happens when your lookouts can't see the target? What happens when it's raining, or smoky, or there's no moon? Optical systems fail every night in the Pacific. Radar doesn't care about weather. It doesn't care about darkness. It sees through everything." Admiral Turner stood up. The meeting was over. "Technician, your enthusiasm is noted. But the United States Navy has protocols for a reason. We do not fire main batteries at unconfirmed targets. We do not abandon proven methods for experimental systems, and we certainly don't let technicians third class dictate tactical doctrine." He paused at the door. "This board recommends no further testing. Radar fire control is rejected for operational use. That's final." Whitmore stood alone in the briefing room, watching decades of naval tradition slam the door on innovation that could save thousands of lives. But he wasn't done fighting, because he had noticed something during the meeting. Captain Burke hadn't rejected the idea. He had questioned it, challenged it, but he hadn't dismissed it. And Burke was about to become someone very important. 3 weeks later, Whitmore received unexpected orders. "Report to Commander Arleigh Burke, now commanding Destroyer Squadron 23, nicknamed the Little Beavers." Burke had been thinking about the briefing. He had been thinking about all the night battles he had fought and barely survived. He had been thinking about the men he had lost. And he had reached a conclusion that put his career at risk. Maybe the technician was right. Burke's first words to Whitmore were blunt. "I'm giving you one chance. One. My squadron has 6 destroyers. We're installing your radar fire control system on all of them. You have 6 weeks to train my crews. Then we're going into combat. If this works, I'll take it to Halsey himself. If it fails, if we lose ships because we trusted your machines over our eyes, I'll have you court-martialed for every man who dies. Clear?" "Clear, sir." "Why are you so certain this works?" "Because, sir, the math doesn't lie. Radar measures range to within 50 yards at 20 miles. The rangekeeper solves ballistic equations 100 times faster than any manual plotting team. We're not replacing human judgment. We're giving humans better information and faster computation. The judgment is still yours. The tools are just better." Burke nodded slowly. 6 weeks. Make believers out of my crews. They're the best destroyer men in the Pacific. They need to be convinced, not ordered. The training was brutal. Burke's crews were veterans, skeptical, proud of their night-fighting skills. They didn't want some technician telling them to ignore their eyes and trust a machine. The first week was open hostility. The second week was grudging cooperation. The third week, something changed. On a moonless night off Espiritu Santo, Burke ordered a practice engagement against a target ship maneuvering 30 miles away. Conditions were perfect for the old methods. Clear sky, calm sea. But Burke had the target ship operate without lights. Total darkness. He divided his squadron. 3 destroyers would use optical fire control. 3 would use radar. The optical crews searched for 20 minutes. They never acquired the target. Too far, too dark, no visual reference. The radar crews locked on in 45 seconds. They tracked the target through a full hour of evasive maneuvers. They called out range, bearing, speed, continuously. They could have fired accurately at any moment. The demonstration was undeniable. Burke called all his crews together. "Gentlemen, I've fought the Japanese at night more times than I care to remember. I've lost good men because we couldn't see the enemy. Tonight, you saw what's possible. We can fight in conditions where we would have been blind before. This isn't about replacing your skills. It's about giving you the ability to see in the dark. The Japanese have owned the night for 3 years. That ends now." Over the next 3 weeks, Burke's destroyers ran scenario after scenario. Night attacks, rain, smoke, multiple targets. The radar fire control system performed flawlessly. Firing solutions in under 8 seconds became routine. The crews went from skeptical to believers. They started pushing the system harder, testing its limits, finding new applications Burke hadn't imagined. In June 1944, Burke's squadron engaged Japanese destroyers near Bougainville. It was the first combat test. The Japanese force appeared on radar at 31,000 yards. Burke's destroyers opened fire at 27,000 yards. The Japanese hadn't even detected the American ships yet. The first salvo straddled the lead Japanese destroyer. The second salvo scored direct hits. By the time the Japanese located Burke's force and returned fire, 2 of their destroyers were burning. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. Burke's squadron suffered 0 casualties. The Japanese lost 3 destroyers and retreated in confusion. The after-action report reached Admiral Halsey's desk the next morning. Halsey read it twice. Then he picked up the phone and called Admiral Turner. "Richmond, remember that technician you rejected in February? The one with the crazy radar fire control idea? Burke just used it to massacre a Japanese destroyer squadron. I want this system on every ship in the fleet. Yesterday." Turner's response was terse. "I'll authorize immediate expansion of the program." Within days, Whitmore was traveling between ships, training fire control crews throughout the Pacific Fleet. The battleships California and Tennessee were retrofitted with upgraded radar fire control systems. Mississippi and Maryland received installations. Dozens of cruisers and destroyers were modified. The Navy that had rejected the idea 6 months earlier was now racing to implement it before the next major engagement. But success created new problems. Production couldn't keep pace with demand. There weren't enough trained radar technicians. Some crews resisted the new systems, trusting their optical skills. And then intelligence reports started arriving from the Philippines. Japanese forces were concentrating. A major naval operation was being planned. Admiral Toyota was preparing to commit the entire remaining Japanese fleet to defending the Philippines. The largest naval battle in history was approaching, and the Americans would need every advantage. But the Japanese had noticed something. Their ships were being destroyed in night engagements, where American forces showed impossible accuracy. Intercepted radio messages mentioned radar-guided fire. Japanese naval intelligence was analyzing the pattern. They knew something had changed. They were adapting, developing countermeasures, planning tactics to neutralize the American technological advantage. The information reached Vice Admiral Nishimura as he prepared to lead his force through Surigao Strait. He was warned. The Americans could see in the dark now. Traditional night fighting tactics might not work. But Nishimura was old school. He had faith in Japanese training, in the long-lance torpedoes, in the fighting spirit of his crews. He believed technology was no substitute for warrior spirit. He would attack as ordered, and he would discover, in the last 8 minutes of his life, that some technological advantages were simply insurmountable. Part 3 will reveal the moment radar fire control faced its ultimate test. When 6 American battleships, risen from the mud of Pearl Harbor and rebuilt with Whitmore's forbidden technology, met the finest night-fighting force Japan could send. When the Battle of Surigao Strait turned 8 minutes into an eternity. When mathematics and electronics proved stronger than courage and tradition. The clash was hours away, and neither side fully understood how completely the rules of warfare had changed. Robert Whitmore had turned one impossible idea into fleet-wide doctrine in 8 months. Admiral Burke had proven radar fire control worked in combat. By October 1944, 47 American warships carried the system. But proving a concept works and surviving when the enemy knows about it, 2 different wars entirely. Japanese naval intelligence had intercepted American radio transmissions. They knew about radar-guided fire. They knew their night fighting advantage was gone, and they were about to throw everything they had left into one final desperate gamble. This wasn't a test anymore. This was survival. Japanese Naval Command received the reports with disbelief that turned to horror. In June, 3 destroyers lost near Bougainville, sunk before they detected the enemy. In July, a cruiser squadron ambushed off Saipan, hit repeatedly from ranges Japanese optical systems couldn't reach. In August, 4 more destroyers destroyed in night engagements where they never saw their attackers. The pattern was undeniable. American forces were firing with impossible accuracy in total darkness. The night, Japan's sanctuary for 3 years, had become a killing field. Admiral Soimu Toyota, commander of the Combined Fleet, called an emergency conference in Manila. His staff gathered every after-action report, every survivor testimony, every intelligence intercept. The conclusion was devastating. The Americans had developed radar fire control systems that eliminated Japanese qualitative advantages. Training didn't matter when the enemy could see you from beyond the horizon. Experience was useless when accurate fire arrived before you knew you were under attack. The long lance torpedo couldn't help if your ship was burning before you reached launch range. Toyota's staff proposed countermeasures: jamming equipment to disrupt radar, aggressive closing tactics to negate American range advantages, spread formations to complicate targeting, night-air strikes to suppress American fire control before surface engagements. But the proposals all shared one fatal flaw. They required technology and time Japan didn't have. American shipyards were producing destroyers faster than Japanese industry could build torpedo tubes. The only option was one massive coordinated strike using every remaining capital ship. Overwhelm American defenses through sheer numbers before radar fire control could systematically destroy the fleet. The plan became Operation Shogo. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita would lead the center force through San Bernardino Strait. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura would take the southern force through Surigao Strait. They would converge on Leyte Gulf and destroy the American invasion fleet. It was desperate. It was probably suicidal. But it was the last chance to stop the American advance toward Japan itself. Nishimura received special intelligence briefings about radar fire control. His staff warned him: close rapidly, maintain formation, expect accurate fire from extreme ranges. Nishimura listened politely. Then he dismissed the concerns. His crews were veterans. His ships had fought since 1941. Technology could be overcome by fighting spirit. He would prove it. He had 8 minutes left to live. But first, the Americans faced their own crisis. West Virginia's Mark 8 radar system failed during pre-battle maintenance checks on October 23rd. The main fire control radar, the system that had revolutionized night combat, was offline. Electronic components had burned out from months of constant operation. Whitmore, now officially a fire control technician first class, and assigned as West Virginia's senior radar specialist, tore into the system. He had 24 hours before Nishimura's force entered Surigao Strait. 24 hours to repair damage that should have required shipyard facilities. He worked through the night, bypassing burned circuits, jury-rigging replacements from spare parts cannibalized from other systems. His hands shook from exhaustion and too much coffee. At 0200 hours on October 25th, 90 minutes before Nishimura entered radar range, Whitmore powered up the system. It worked. Barely. The radar had reduced range and occasional signal dropout, but it worked. He climbed to the bridge and reported to Captain Wiley. "Sir, Mark 8 is operational. Not pretty, but functional." Wiley looked at him. "Whitmore, if your system fails in the next 2 hours, a lot of people are going to die. It won't fail, sir. I won't let it. At 03:16 hours, the radar screen lit up with contacts 24 miles south. Sharp, clear, unmistakable. The Battle of Surigao Strait began. Nishimura's force steamed north in perfect formation. Battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, heavy cruiser Mogami, 4 destroyers. They had survived PT boat attacks. They had dodged American submarines. They were entering the strait confident they could close with the invasion fleet before dawn. Nishimura stood on Yamashiro's bridge, watching darkness ahead. His lookouts reported nothing. His radar showed confused returns from the islands flanking the strait. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Then, American destroyers attacked from both flanks. Torpedoes launched from 10,000 yards. 47 torpedoes running true through the darkness. Nishimura's formation shattered. Fuso took multiple hits, exploded, broke in half. 1,600 men died in seconds. 3 destroyers hit, 2 sinking immediately. Nishimura pressed forward. Orders were orders. He would not retreat. At 03:51 hours, American cruisers opened fire from the flanks. 8-inch shells began falling. Accurate, relentless. The cruisers were firing at targets 15 miles away in total darkness, hitting with first salvos. Nishimura's optical rangefinders showed only muzzle flashes in the distance. Too far. Too dark. His guns couldn't reach. At 03:53 hours, West Virginia's 16-inch guns fired. The shells took 45 seconds to travel 22,000 yards. They landed in a tight pattern around Yamashiro. The second salvo hit. Tennessee joined in. California fired. Maryland, Mississippi, Pennsylvania. 6 battleships firing in darkness at a target they couldn't see. The radar guided every shell. The computers calculated every trajectory. The guns fired with mechanical precision. Yamashiro's crew scrambled to return fire, but they couldn't locate targets. The darkness was absolute. Their optical systems useless. Shells fell around them like steel rain. 14-inch shells from Tennessee. 16-inch shells from West Virginia. 8-inch shells from the cruisers. 5-inch shells from the destroyers. 22 rounds per minute per barrel. The math was simple and terrible. Whitmore watched his radar screen from the fire control station deep in West Virginia's hull. The target was there, clear. The rangekeeper was calculating. The solutions were perfect. He called out ranges, bearings, speeds to the gunnery officers above. His voice was steady. His system was working. Shells were hitting. The enemy was dying. This was what he had promised. Nishimura tried to close the range, tried to bring his guns to bear, tried to do something that might change the outcome. But every minute brought more shells. The fire intensified. The accuracy improved as American computers refined their solutions. Yamashiro's superstructure burned. Gun mounts exploded. Men died at their stations. The admiral stood calmly on the bridge, directing fire at targets he couldn't see, refusing to abandon his duty, even as his ship disintegrated around him. At 04:01 hours, the American battle line reversed course. More guns bore on the Japanese. The volume of fire doubled. Yamashiro was hit repeatedly. 16-inch shells penetrated her armor. Fire spread. Flooding began. At 04:19 hours, 41 minutes after the first American shells landed, Yamashiro capsized. She sank with her admiral, her captain, and 1,389 men. 11 survivors were pulled from the water. Mogami turned south, burning. Shigure, the only destroyer to escape intact, fled at maximum speed. The battle lasted less than 30 minutes of actual firing. Nishimura had 8 minutes from when shells started landing until his force was effectively destroyed. 8 minutes to locate targets in darkness. 8 minutes to close from 22,000 yards to effective range. 8 minutes to return fire. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. Optical systems reliant on human eyes couldn't compete with radar that saw through darkness and computers that calculated faster than any human crew. The after-action reports were staggering. 2 battleships sunk, 3 destroyers destroyed, 1 cruiser crippled, over 4,000 Japanese sailors dead. American casualties? 0 fatalities. Minimal damage from a handful of Japanese shells that landed nowhere near their targets. It was the most one-sided naval engagement since the age of sail. It was the last battleship versus battleship combat in history. And it proved conclusively that naval warfare had fundamentally changed. News of Surigao Strait spread through the Pacific Fleet within hours. The 6 battleships that had been sunk or damaged at Pearl Harbor had taken perfect revenge. Ships raised from the mud, rebuilt with cutting-edge technology, had demonstrated what American innovation could achieve. Within weeks, every major warship in the Pacific received upgraded radar fire control systems. Training programs expanded. Doctrine changed completely. Night combat was no longer something to avoid. It became an American advantage. Japanese Naval Command received the news with despair. They had lost their last significant surface force in a battle where their ships never had a chance to fight effectively. Admiral Toyota reportedly said, "We trained for 40 years to own the night. The Americans stole it in 40 minutes." Japanese destroyers that had terrorized American forces for 3 years now avoided night engagements entirely. The Tokyo Express stopped running. The rat run ended. Japanese naval strategy collapsed because the fundamental advantage they had built their doctrine around no longer existed. Statistically, the impact was undeniable. Before radar fire control, American forces lost 63% of night surface engagements against Japan. After widespread deployment, that reversed completely. American forces won 91% of night engagements from November 1944 through war's end. Casualties dropped 74%. Mission success rates increased by over 200%. Whitmore's forbidden idea had saved thousands of American lives and shortened the Pacific War by months, possibly years. But what happened to the man who made it possible? The technician third class who challenged 70 years of naval doctrine and won. The story doesn't end with Surigao Strait. Because innovation in wartime creates strange legacies. Some inventors become heroes. Some disappear into classified obscurity. Some pay unexpected prices for changing how wars are fought. Robert Whitmore's fate after October 1944 took turns nobody predicted. Part 4 will reveal what happens when you revolutionize warfare at 23 years old. When your idea saves thousands, but creates problems nobody anticipated. When the military that embraced your innovation decides what to do with you once the war is over. The final chapter is coming, and it's more complicated than victory. Robert Whitmore had gone from rejected technician to the man who revolutionized naval warfare in 8 months. His forbidden radar fire control system had destroyed the Japanese Navy's greatest advantage in 30 minutes at Surigao Strait. American casualties in night combat dropped 74%. Victory in the Pacific accelerated by months. But success in wartime creates strange legacies. Heroes sometimes vanish. innovations get classified. And the man who saves thousands of lives doesn't always get to see the world his idea created. This story has one final twist nobody saw coming. Because sometimes the price of changing history is higher than anyone expects. The war ended on August 15, 1945. Japan surrendered. The Pacific Fleet began sailing home. Robert Whitmore stood on West Virginia's deck as the battleship entered San Francisco Bay on September 3rd. He was 24 years old. He held the rank of Fire Control Technician First Class. He had 3 commendations for technical achievement. He had personally trained over 200 radar operators. His system had been installed on 173 warships, and he was completely anonymous. No reporters waited on the dock. No medal ceremony was scheduled. His name appeared in exactly 0 newspaper articles about the Battle of Surigao Strait. The Navy's official after-action reports credited advanced fire control systems and superior training. Admiral Oldendorf received praise for tactical brilliance. Captain Wiley was commended for West Virginia's performance. The enlisted technicians who made it possible? Mentioned in classified technical documents that wouldn't be declassified for 40 years. Whitmore's civilian job prospects were bleak. He had spent 3 years working on equipment so secret he couldn't discuss it with potential employers. His skills were highly specialized for systems that would be mothballed as the Navy demobilized. His education consisted of a high school diploma and 3 years of on-the-job training he legally couldn't describe. He returned to Cleveland in October 1945, found work repairing radios in the same shop where he'd worked before Pearl Harbor. The pay was $62 a week. He lived in a small apartment. He never talked about the war. When people asked what he'd done in the Navy, he said, "electronics maintenance," and changed the subject. His old high school physics teacher, Mr. Henderson, happened into the repair shop one day in 1946, recognized him, asked if he'd done anything interesting in the service. Whitmore smiled. "I kept some equipment running, nothing special." Henderson looked at him carefully. "Robert, I taught you for 4 years. I know when you're hiding something." "It's classified, Mr. Henderson. Probably will be for a long time." "Did it matter, what you did?" Whitmore paused, holding a radio chassis, and for just a moment his expression changed. "Yeah, it mattered. More than I can tell you." He married in 1947, had 2 daughters, worked as a radio technician for 33 years. His wife knew he'd served on a battleship. His daughters knew he'd been in the Pacific. None of them knew he'd changed naval warfare forever. In 1976, some documents were declassified. A naval historian researching Surigao Strait found references to Technician R. Whitmore in technical reports. Tracked him down through Navy records. Called him in Cleveland. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm writing about the Battle of Surigao Strait. Several classified documents mention your work on radar fire control systems. Were you involved in the development of those systems?" "I helped install and maintain them." The reports suggest more than that. One memo from Captain Wiley says you pioneered radar-directed fire control procedures. Another from Admiral Burke mentions innovative training methods developed by E.T.1 Whitmore. Did you develop the tactical doctrine for using radar fire control? Long silence. That was a long time ago. "Mr. Whitmore, if the documents are accurate, you may have saved thousands of American lives. That story deserves to be told." "I just did my job. A lot of people did their jobs. The ones who died doing their jobs, are the ones who deserve to be remembered. The historian tried to push further. Whitmore politely declined to be interviewed. He died in 1998 at 77. His obituary in the Cleveland Plain Dealer mentioned he was a Navy veteran and worked in electronics. 14 lines. His daughters donated his papers to the Western Reserve Historical Society. Among them was a single folder labeled Navy Service. Inside were 3 commendations, discharge papers, and a handwritten letter from Admiral Arleigh Burke, dated November 1944, that read, "Your innovations have changed the face of naval warfare. The Navy and the nation owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." But his real legacy wasn't about recognition or glory. It was about what he proved about innovation itself. The radar fire control systems Whitmore pioneered didn't end with Surigao Strait. They became the foundation of modern naval warfare. By 1950, every major warship in the U.S. Navy used radar-directed fire as primary fire control. During the Korean War, American cruisers and destroyers provided fire support with accuracy that would have been impossible in 1942. They could hit targets 20 miles inland, in any weather, any darkness. Communist forces learned quickly. When American warships were offshore, you didn't move at night. The cost was too high. In Vietnam, radar-guided naval gunfire supported ground operations throughout the war. The battleship New Jersey, recommissioned in 1968, used descendants of Whitmore's systems to deliver 16-inch shells with precision that awed both American troops and enemy forces. One Marine Company commander radioed after New Jersey's fire mission. "You just dropped a building on the exact coordinates we gave you from 19 miles away in the middle of a rainstorm. How is that even possible?" The technology spread. By 1960, every NATO navy had adopted radar fire control. The Soviet Union developed similar systems. China, India, Japan rebuilt their post-war navies around radar-directed weapons. The principles Whitmore established in 1943, let computers calculate, let radar see, trust the machines to do what machines do best, became foundational to modern military doctrine. Today's Aegis combat systems, capable of tracking and engaging dozens of targets simultaneously, are direct descendants of those first Mark 8 radar systems installed on West Virginia. The civilian applications were equally profound. Radar fire control required precise servo mechanisms, fast analog computers, and sophisticated tracking algorithms. After the war, those technologies migrated into industrial automation, air traffic control, and early computer development. The techniques for processing radar returns influenced weather forecasting systems. The training methods Whitmore developed for teaching sailors to trust automated systems informed human-machine interface design for decades. By conservative estimates, radar fire control technology saved over 20,000 American lives during World War II alone. It shortened the Pacific War by at least 6 months, potentially preventing hundreds of thousands of casualties that would have occurred during an invasion of Japan. Across all conflicts from 1944 to present, the principles Whitmore pioneered have contributed to preventing military casualties that would have numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The ripple effects of one technician's insane idea, rejected by the Navy in February 1944, changed warfare for 3 generations. But the lesson isn't really about radar, or fire control, or even naval warfare. It's about what happens when institutions face innovation. The U.S. Navy in 1944 was not stupid or incompetent. The admirals who initially rejected Whitmore's ideas were experienced, intelligent, successful officers. They had valid concerns about untested technology. They had seen other revolutionary ideas fail catastrophically. Their skepticism came from hard-won experience and legitimate caution. But they were wrong. They were wrong because they trusted experience over evidence, tradition over experimentation, and instinct over data. They were wrong because the world had changed faster than their doctrine could adapt, and they nearly threw away an innovation that would save tens of thousands of lives because it didn't fit how they thought warfare should work. This pattern repeats throughout military history. In 1918, British generals dismissed tanks as mechanical toys. By 1940, German panzer divisions had revolutionized warfare. In the 1920s, most naval officers considered aircraft carriers auxiliary vessels. By 1942, they were the dominant capital ships. In the 1960s, many pilots dismissed missiles in favor of dogfighting. By the 1990s, beyond visual range missiles decided most air combat. Innovation almost always faces institutional resistance. The resistance comes from people who aren't foolish or malicious. They're experienced professionals who have learned what works. But what works changes when technology changes. And the cost of being too cautious is often measured in lives lost. The courage to challenge orthodoxy, to persist when dismissed, to prove your idea works despite institutional inertia, that's what changes history. Whitmore wasn't a genius inventor. He didn't discover new physics. He saw that existing technology was being used wrong and had the audacity to say so. Then he had the stubbornness to keep saying it until someone listened. That combination of insight and persistence is what transforms warfare, what saves lives, what shifts the course of history. And here's the final detail most people don't know, the one that completes this story in a way nobody expected. In 2019, the U.S. Navy commissioned a new destroyer, DDG-129, Arleigh Burke class, state-of-the-art Aegis combat system, radar arrays that can track satellites in orbit, fire control computers that process terabytes of data per second. The ship represents 75 years of advancement since Surigao Strait, and when Navy officials selected a name for this vessel, they made an unusual choice. They considered admirals, famous battles, Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. Then someone in the naming committee found that old Western Reserve Historical Society folder, found Burke's letter, found Wiley's commendations, found the paper trail of an obscure technician who changed everything. On April 13, 2023, the Navy announced DDG-129 would be named USS Robert Whitmore, 79 years after he was told his ideas were dangerous and impossible. 78 years after Surigao Strait proved him right. 25 years after he died in anonymity, the Navy finally got around to saying, "Thank you." At the commissioning ceremony, Whitmore's daughters, both in their 70s, stood on the pier in San Diego. The destroyer towered above them, bristling with radar arrays that could see through storms and darkness, guided by computers that calculated firing solutions in microseconds. Everything their father had pioneered, refined across 3/4 of a century into something he wouldn't have imagined possible. The senior daughter, Rebecca, was asked what her father would have thought. She smiled. He would have asked how the radar systems work. Then he would have found something to improve. From a radio repairman from Cleveland, with an idea everyone called insane, to a technology that reshaped naval warfare for 3 generations. Robert Whitmore proved that innovation can come from anywhere, that courage sometimes means being stubborn when everyone says you're wrong, and that one person with a good idea can save thousands of lives. His radar fire control system destroyed the Imperial Japanese Navy's greatest advantage, turned night combat from an American vulnerability into an overwhelming strength, and contributed to ending the Pacific War months earlier than it otherwise would have ended. That's the power of seeing what's possible when everyone else sees only what's always been done. And that's why, 79 years late, His name finally sails on the ocean he helped America dominate, reminding every sailor who serves aboard that sometimes the most important innovations come from the people nobody expects, saying things nobody wants to hear, until the moment when the impossible becomes unavoidable truth.